and welcome to 30 Days of Hoya. Today we will take a look at Hoya brevialata. This Hoya is native to Southeast Asia, it is native to Indonesia, and it's actually native to the island of Sulawesi. And oftentimes you will find it in the sale under the name of Hoya sulawesi, but that name is simply not correct. The correct way to call this is Hoya brevialata. Hoya brevialatas that I have come from two different sources. One that you can see here that I'm holding in my hand comes from a friend of mine and is the same friend who gifted me the cutting of Hoya species affinis burtoniae. And the second one in the back that doesn't look so good comes from a division of a larger plant. You can see it here, but I think personally to me this one looks a lot better. Hoya brevialata falls in that intermediate temperature range, so anywhere from 15 to 35 degrees of Celsius or from 60 to 95 degrees of Fahrenheit. I never really had any issues in terms of temperature with this Hoya, so I think just your regular house temperature should be fine. It has a pretty wide temperature range, I would say. Hoya brevialata has these very small pubescent leaves, and sometimes they are a different shape. You can see the ones on the bottom here are more narrow, but if we look at the ones towards the top, some of them are more rounded. I quite like the shape of the leaves. They remind me of a Dischidia or even of a Peperomia, and that's why I like this way the most, I have to admit. So it's not the flower, but it's the way that the leaves look. And I think this will become quite a looker when it's a nice and a large plant, which will take some time. This is the original cutting that I got from a friend, and it was able to push out this long vine here that you can see. So I would say it's a fairly fast grower. I only received it in October, if I remember correctly. Now, the second one is a division, and this one doesn't look very hot, but I was able to propagate two cuttings from this division. One of them is here, and it's looking a bit more normal than the original part of the division that I left. And the second one is here, which again looks much better than the original part. And when it comes to this part of the division that's not looking so hot, I will probably take cuttings again and continue to propagate it until there is nothing left. So I think it will take off and it will look much better if I make several cuttings from this and then reroot the entire division again, because I think that it's really not working out for me the way it's currently looking. I much prefer this look. Hoya brevialata will need a more regular watering, so it does like moisture a bit more. I notice when it doesn't get enough moisture, the leaves will get shriveled up, and on the cutting, you can actually see some examples of that. You can see that this isn't looking the best, it's not having the time of its life. Now, I have to be honest, even from the start, this division needed much more water than the cutting I rooted myself. Now, this doesn't mean that I have magical hands or anything like that. It's just that I think when you divide Hoyas, the roots get damaged quite a bit and it takes a lot for them to recover. It's much better if you can get a cutting and then root it yourself. Especially with this Hoya, it's not very challenging. I was able to just put it in water, in distilled water, and it rooted up in a week or two. So and this one, also the small one, it didn't really need a lot of time to root and it's looking fairly well. I water it every 7 or 8 days, depending on the conditions. I usually don't really wait for it to get all dehydrated. I cannot really help it with this one, with the division, but this one stays in fairly good condition, I would say, if I don't forget it. These leaves are a bit misleading, I would say. You would think that it doesn't need so much water, but really it gets dehydrated really fast. Once again, this is my standard Hoya mix with bark, perlite, cocoa peat, general potting mix, and I think some leca here. I'm not sure if there is ceramis, but you can see if I just move my finger, this is a very airy mix, very loose. It doesn't hold on to too much water. So if you have a plant that requires more water, you can amend the mix by adding more cocoa peat, which I usually never do. I'm very heavy on bark and perlite with my Hoyas, but that just means that you will have to water a bit more frequently. All throughout the winter, I kept this under my LED light off to the side of the shelf, so I keep it in a hanging planter. I did put it outside for a couple of months, but you can see, especially on this one, that the leaves get very, very light green, and some of them get a bit palish, yellowish when they get too much light. So it's not overwatered, it's just that it received too much light. So bright and direct light, I would say, will work best. Northeast, northwest, or eastern window. I don't think you need to put this in the western window. If you work only with windows with strong light, I would pull it back depending on what window you're working with. But I think it can go directly in northeast, northwest, eastern windows, so something with a gentler light. Flower of this Hoya is very small. It's cream with red center. It is said that the flower smells like caramel or butterscotch. I have never smelled it or seen it on my Hoya because it's fairly small. I think maybe this year I might be able to see some peduncles. We will see. They say that once this starts blooming, it also blooms very often. So once you get it to bloom for the first time, I think it should not be an issue to get it to bloom again and again for you, which is quite nice because you will always have something that is in bloom. The only thing to remember is not to give it too much light, or you might end up with these very pale leaves. And just to make sure that it has enough moisture, but of course don't overwater it, like you shouldn't overwater any of your Hoyas. So you will be able to get this one in your garden center. It's becoming more and more common in Europe. The ones that I have seen look very nice when they are big, so I think it will be a nice addition to your collection and a nice starting Hoya for you. Thank you for watching. This was Hoya brevialata, and I will see you again in our next 30 Days of Hoya.